Welcome to Drive the Daf, clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
The Shabbos Daf Kuf Hey contains a grand total of 3 Mishnayos. It also ends Perek Haboine and begins Perek Ha'oireg. From the beginning of the Daf until the end of the Perek discusses lists of abbreviations in the Torah. Then just before the end, there's a Mishnah that finishes up the halachos of writing in one line of the Gemara. And then we start in Perek Ha'oireg, which has 2 Mishnayos. The first one has the halachos of weaving, and then the next one will teach us the halachos of tearing. So first of all, the Gemara wants to know, where do you have abbreviations in the Torah? Why is this important? Because the Mishnah, the last Mishnah we had seen, had a machlokes between the Chachamim and Rabbi Yeshua ben Seir. If somebody writes one letter, but it's an abbreviation for a long word, and you can understand the word, is that an Isser D'Oraisa or not? We know that an Isser D'Oraisa has to be a minimum of 2 letters, but this one letter is more significant than just one letter. It's really a whole word. So what is the halacha there? So that was a machlokes. And Gemara now wants to know, where do you have a concept of abbreviations at all in the Torah? So the Gemara brings a number of examples. First of all, Avram Avinu was called Av Hamoyin Goyim. Hashem said, "You're Av Hamoyin." Av Hamoyin stands for Av Bachur Hamoyin Chaviv Melech Vasik Neman. Hashem is saying, I've made you all these things amongst the nations. I've made you a father, I've made you the chosen one, I have made you from many nations, I have made you the king of the nations, I have made you the ancient one, the trusted one of the nations, and I have made you the trusted, amongst the nations. Now, next example is the word Anoichi. In the Aseres Hadibros, it begins with Anoichi. Why does this say Ani? Why does it say Anoichi? Because it stands for something. The Gemara has here 3 different versions. It has Rav Yochanan says, it's Ana Nafshi Ksivas Yehovis. I wrote it myself and I gave it to you. The Rabbanan say, it's Amira Ne'ima Ksiva Yehiva. A sweet speaking, a sweet speech I wrote and gave to you. Some say you're supposed to read it in reverse. There's a very similar expression, but you just reverse the letters. Yehiva ksiva ne'emanin amrei. I gave to you a sweet speech. Okay, next example is Rabbi Nosson. He says, when Bilam was confronted by the Malach, he said, Ki yarat haderech lenegdi. What does yarat mean? So it stands for yara rasa natza. It saw you, it was afraid, and it turned away, referring to the donkey. The Bay Rabbi Shmuel says Carmel. When we're describing the Karban Ha'omer, we say that it should be Geres Carmel. Carmel stands for Carmele, meaning that you should have fresh barley when you bring it. You should fill a sack with fresh barley. Since it's fresher, it's larger, and it fills up the sack completely. The next example is from Sefer Shmuel. When referring to Shemi ben Gera, it says Kililani Klala Nimretzes. He cursed me a very vociferous curse. The word Nimretzes is an abbreviation for Noyefu, Mayavihu, Retzechu, Tzayruhu, Toyevahu. To say that he's an adulterer, he's from Moab, he's a murderer, he's a troublemaker, and he is an abomination. Next example is from the word Nitztadok. When the Shvatim said to Yosef, who they didn't know was Yosef, Nitztadik, what can we say? What can we justify? You've caught our sin. So Nitztadak was really a remez that he was saying we are clean of it. Nitztadak stands for Nechayim Anachnu, Tzadikim Anachnu, Tahirim Anachnu, Dachim Anachnu, Kedoshim Anachnu. We are correct, we are holy, we are pure, we are not sinful, and we are holy again. Okay. This takes us to the last Mishnah in the Perek. The Mishnah discusses the rules of writing, and if you write 2 separate letters separately, is that an Isser D'Oraisa or not? Can you be chayav a karban chatas or not? So we know that in order to be able to be chayav a karban chatas, you have to be have written the 2 letters in one period of forgetfulness of the halacha. So if you write the letters and you remembered in between that it was an Isser, or you wrote the letters in 2 totally separate times, one let's say in the morning and one late in the evening, so that it's as if you remembered in between. So that's a machlokes between Rabbi Gamliel and the Chachamim. Rabbi Gamliel says you can bring a karban chatos anyway, because you wrote both letters. It doesn't matter that you forgot, that you remember the halach in between. And the Chachamim say no, you can't. You have to have forgotten straight the whole time, or done them close together and forgotten straight the whole time. So Gemara says, what's the machlokes about? Machlokes is, does finding out about the Isser in between the two actions of Isser, does that separate it into two separate shiurim? Do we say each one's only half a shir and therefore you can't bring the carbon, or do we say, no, as long as you forgot both letters, it doesn't matter that you remembered in between? And that ends Perek HaBoina, and now we can begin Perek HaOreg. Perek HaOreg is a very short chapter which discusses the halachas of weaving. So let's just have an overview of how weaving worked in the days of Chazal. There was a frame which had a series of threads set into it in parallel form to each other, each thread parallel to the next. These were called the shesi. And there were two rods which were suspended over the threads, kind of centered over the middle of the frame. Each rod had a series of loops coming down, and the loops alternately held threads, meaning each alternate thread was held in one rod, and the threads between them were held in the other rod. And by raising one rod and lowering the other, you could stretch the alternating chassis thread so that you could slip the cross thread, which is called the erev, between them. Then you could switch which threads were up, and then you could go back the other way with the erev thread, and then this way you could go back and forth and you would be able to weave. So the Mishnah describes a number of halachos here. First of all, how much do you have to weave the erev thread back and forth across the chassis in order to be violating the Isser? So Rabbi Eliezer says it depends. If you're starting a new cloth, so you're doing the first thread, so you have to do 3. If it's less than 3 threads, it's not significant enough to be chayiv, to be an Isser deraisa. If, however, it's an existing cloth and you're adding on a thread, you just have to add 1. The Chachamim say it doesn't matter whether it's existing or it's new. Either way, it's 2 rows of the erev thread back and forth in order to be chayiv the Isser. Now some other halachos here. If you set the parallel chassis threads into the frame, you set 2 threads in the frame, that's an Isser deraisa. And the Mishnah says whether it's a kirus or a napa or a kavara or a sal. A kirus, the Gemara will explain what that is. It's the foot pedals that control the hiring and lowering of the rods to lift up the threads in the middle. A napa and a kavara are a sifter and a sieve, and a sal is a basket. These things were made slightly differently. They stretched one erev thread between 2 chassis threads, and then they inserted the chassis threads along the way in between. First they did the end corners, and then they stuck the chassis threads through them. Either way, if you stick in the chassis threads, whether it's in the frame or it's in the woven ends of the basket, it's an Isser deraisa. Now, what about sewing? So sewing is if you sew 2 stitches is an Isser deraisa, and if you tear 2 stitches out or you tear place in order to resew 2 stitches, that's also an Isser deraisa. Okay, that's the Mishnah. Now the Gemara, first of all, has a different version of this Mishnah, which is brought by Rabbi Yitzchak, who says that Rabbi Eliezer's shita, which we saw as being 3 threads if you're starting a cloth, he says it's only 2 threads if you're starting a cloth. So the Gemara says that conflicts with our Mishnah. The Gemara says it's not a contradiction. Depends what kind of thread you're using. One is referring to where you have thick threads, the one is referring to where you have thin threads. The problem is we don't really know which one is which. The thin threads is 2 or the thick threads is 2. It could go both ways. Why? Because the thick threads don't hold very tightly. They slip out. So it could be that you need 3 of the thick threads in order to hold it. But you have thin threads, it holds tighter so it won't slip out, and therefore it's an Isser deraisa with only 2. Or it could go the other way. 3 threads. The thick threads are obviously thick, and therefore it's a significant weaving even if you only wove 2. So that's an Isser deraisa. But the 2 threads of the thin threads is not enough to be an Isser deraisa because you don't see anything. You don't see anything woven. But if you have 2 of the thick threads, so that is an Isser deraisa because you do see a significant woven amount there. Okay, that's that. Now the Gemara wants to know who the halacha is like. The Gemara quotes 2 brises, which bring the same machlokas between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim. One of them has Rabbi Eliezer as the Tanakama, the Stam, the one without a name, and the Chachamim are arguing on him. And the other one has the reverse. It has the Chachamim as the Stam, and Rabbi Eliezer is coming to argue on them. Okay, so we have 2 versions. In one, Rabbi Eliezer is the Stam, and the other one, the Chachamim are the Stam. But these 2 brises both add on halacha. They add that around the rim of the cloth, people would weave a different type of thread. They would hold it would be fancier, it would be thicker. They would hold it there around the rim. Now that rim sewing is enough if you just add a thread, a rim thread, it just has to cross 3 chassis threads. That's all you have to do. Usually, as we'll see further in the daf, the size for the minimum of weaving is not the entire length of the cloth. It's wide enough to fit it to be equal to the space between a man's finger, his forefinger, and his middle finger when he spreads them as far as they go. But here, as far as the edge, you just need to be 3 threads. Why is that? Because it's like when people sew a cloth that they plan to use for a belt, so it's very thin and long. So it's 3 long chassis threads and 1 arab thread that goes back and forth across the 3 threads. So 3 threads is the minimum amount for something like that, and the edge thread is very similar to that. So therefore it's enough if it's only 3 threads long. Okay, now the Gemara defines the terms that we have of where you set the chassis threads. So we had said that you set it in the nirin, that's the frame that you set the parallel threads into. So the Gemara says it's actually 3 steps. You have to set in each end of the frame, and you also have to set it in the loops that cross through the middle of it so that you can raise and lower the threads. Now the kirus, we said you have to set it in. We said that's the foot pedals that control the raising and the lowering. Okay, the next malacha the Mishnah said was if you stitch 2 stitches. The Gemara wants to know why do we have to add this. We already said that when we listed the 39 malachos of Shabbos. We listed if you stitch 2 stitches. Why is this repeated? Now everything else in our Mishnah is also repeated, but here we added halachas. We added the amount, we had a machlokes about it, we added where you set the chassis threads into, but this isn't adding anything. So the Gemara says, you're right, we only listed this because we wanted to say that if you tear, space to stitch 2. So the Gemara says, what do you mean? That's also in the list, that doesn't help you. The Gemara says, alright, the real reason is because later we're going to list that if you tear without intent to stitch anything, you tear just because you're upset, so that's not an Isser D'Oraisa. Here we wanted to mention that the inverse of that is if you tear to stitch 2 stitches, it is an Isser D'Oraisa, and therefore we also had to bring this about the stitches themselves. Okay, now the Gemara said, the Mishnah had the halacha that if you rip space for 2 stitches, it's an Isser D'Oraisa. The Gemara says, who in the world rips 2 stitches? The Gemara says, no, it happens because when you sew, sometimes it doesn't work out evenly, and the cloth folds. You end up with a little bit of a loop there. So you need to tear out the remaining stitching in order to redo it smooth. So there you might be ripping out just 2 stitches worth, and you would re-sew it smoothly. This takes us to the next Mishnah. The next Mishnah discusses 2 primary things. First of all, what happens if somebody destroys something, right? He's tearing out the stitches that were sewn. What if he's just destroying? He's not actually intending to fix. What's the halacha there? And second of all, what is the minimum size for a number of the halachas involved in making cloth? That'll be the Mishnah. And, okay, let's see the Mishnah first. We'll preview the Gemara soon. The Mishnah says, if somebody tears in anger, or he tears because he's ripping his shirt, as is the halacha for somebody who lost a close relative, so either of these 2 things are just destructive, and destruction is not an Isser D'Oraisa. It's only an Isser D'Oraisa if it's maybe destroying, but for a constructive purpose, ultimately, like we said earlier, if you tear with the intent to sew it up. Now, the next thing is the sizes here. So what is the size? So as far as bleaching fibers, let's say wool, or combing them out, or coloring them, or spinning them into thread, it's enough to make a thread which is twice the width of the space between the index finger and forefinger of a man, spreading them as far as he can. However, you're weaving a thread of erev onto a cloth, that's 1, not twice, but 1 length of the space between the forefinger and the middle finger. Okay, now the Gemara is going to discuss at length this idea that if you're destroying something in anger or because of mourning, that it's not an Isser D'Oraisa. The Gemara is going to have a contradiction. The Gemara will say that the cases where it is in Isser D'Oraisa is where it was appropriate to, and then the Gemara will have a list of proper behavior for various different people who have passed away. Then we'll get into some Agadata on the subject, and then we'll talk about when you're allowed to display anger. So we're going to be discussing mourning and anger here. So first of all, the Gemara says we have a contradiction. Our Mishnah said that if you tear in anger, or if you tear for the dead, it's not an Isser D'Oraisa because it's just destructive, but we have a brisa that says that it is an Isser D'Oraisa. It is an Isser Daraisa, and not only that, but as far as tearing for the dead, you have fulfilled the obligation of tearing, even though you were Mechal Shabbos, but you did tear correctly. So the Gemara says, okay, it's not a kasha. Tearing for the dead is a constructive purpose. You have a mitzvah to tear, and that's constructive. It's constructive because you fulfilled the chiyuv. Therefore, this brisa, which says that it's in Daraisa, is referring to where you tore for somebody that you were chayiv to tear for, like a close relative. Our Mishnah was referring to where it was not a relative. So what's the could that be? The Mishnah says Hakayre al Meisai, on his loss, on somebody who was his who died. So the Mishnah says, okay, you're right. Both of them are referring to where it was a relative of his. The difference is that the Mishnah was referring to where it was not a relative that he's chayiv to tear on. It was not one of the 7 close relatives. It was a relative of his that he is obligated to bury him, but he's not chayiv to tear for him. But the Bryce is referring to where he is chayiv to tear for him. Now the Gemara says, but hold on a second. Even if he's not a relative, if he's a chacham, if he's a wise man, he's still responsible to tear for him, like a Bryce says that everybody has to tear for a wise man. The Brisa goes on to say everybody is considered to be close to him, everybody has to tear on him, everybody has to tear until his shoulder is exposed, which is the halacha for Avelos, and everybody has to eat the Sudas Havra, which is the first meal that you serve to a mourner. So all these things apply to even people who are not relatives, as long as the person who was lost is a chacham. So the Gemara says, okay, so we're referring to he's not a chacham. Then the Gemara says, hold on a second, but even if he's just an Adam Kasher, he's just a good person, everybody is really supposed to mourn for him. We have a brisa that says, why does a person lose his own children? Why does he have to suffer that? In order that he should make sure to cry over every good person who's lost. The Gemara says, what? You're going to take his children away in order he should do something? What does that mean? The Gemara says, no. It means because he didn't. It's a punishment for having been faulted in not mourning properly over a good person who died. And it adds that anybody who mourns over an Adam Kasher has all his sins atoned for because he honored him. So the Gemara says, okay, so obviously our Mishnah is referring to where you didn't have to mourn for him. He was not an Adam Kasher. He was not somebody you're supposed to mourn for. So now the Gemara says, hold on, but there's another circumstance in which you're supposed to tear. It's not only if he's a relative, or if he's a Chacham, or if he's an Adam Kasher. If you were present at the time when the soul departed, you have to be there. Because anybody who's in the room when the soul departs, it's like seeing a Sefer Torah go up in flames, because every Jew has Torah and mitzvahs in him. So it says, okay, so it's referring to where you weren't there at the time where the soul departed. Okay, that's about mourning. We'll get back to it later. But now we want to know that our Mishnah said in anger, and the Brisa also said in anger. Our Mishnah said if he tears in anger, it's not an Yesod Daraisa, it's just destruction, and the Brisa said it is. This is the old machlekes of Yehuda and Reb Shimon about a malacha shenitzricha lekufa. If you do a malacha for the wrong purpose, is that an Yesod Daraisa or not? So this is Reb Yehuda who says that it is. The Brisa is Reb Shimon who says that it's not. The Gemara says, hold on a second. Rabbi Yehuda says if you do it for the wrong purpose, it's an Isser Daraisa. It doesn't say if it's a destructive purpose, it's an Isser Daraisa. We don't have that. So the Gemara says, no, but tearing in anger is actually a constructive purpose because you let the anger out, and that way you won't walk around being angry. You're not allowed to be angry. So if you tear and you get the anger out, it's a shtickle mitzvah. The Gemara says, what do you mean? To tear in anger is a mitzvah? You're not allowed to destroy things in anger. We have a brisa that says, or Shimon ben Elazar says, in the name of Chilfa bar Igra, in the name of Yechon ben Nuri, anybody who tears clothing, or breaks objects, or spends money wildly, in any of these things that he does, because of anger, he should be viewed as an idol worshiper, because that's what the Yetzer Hara does. First he gets you to do one little thing, you lose control over that, and then he builds his advantage until he finally has control over you and he sends you to do Avodah Zarah. So somebody who acts out of anger is totally giving in to his impulses. He's very shortly going to be completely under the control of the Yetzer Hara. So the Gemara says, I even have a pasuk to prove it. It says, Lo yeh b'cha el zar v'lo yishtachav el necha. You should not have in you a foreign god. Foreign god in you? How can it be in you? It means the Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Hara is inside a person and it acts like a foreign god. It even brings him to idol worship. So the Gemara says, okay, so you're asking that you're not allowed to tear in anger. The answer is where he's not really angry. Not really angry. He's pretending to be angry in order that he creates a sense of order and law in his house. He wants the people in his house to have some respect. And therefore he acts as if he's very angry, but he's not really feeling any angry. Again, a few examples of Amoraim who used to do things like this in their anger, in their pretend anger. Rav Yehuda would pull threads out of cloth to show that he was upset, even when he really wasn't. Rav Acha bar Yaakov would break some already broken kelim. He didn't want to waste them, so he broke ones that already broken. Rav Sheshis took a tin of little fish, sardines, and he flipped it over. And Rabbi Abba broke the lid of a kli. The lid was an easy thing to make. It didn't fit exactly. You could use anything as a lid. Rav Shimon ben Pazi says the name of Yeshua ben Levi. And here's some I got it on the subject. Anybody who cries over a good person, HaKadosh Baruch Hu counts them and saves them in a special flask in his treasure house. Like it says in the pasuk, Naidi Safarta, Ata Sima Demasi B'Neidecha, Alei B'Sefer Secha. You'll count my tears and you'll place them in your flask. Now says Rav Yeshua. Now says Rav Yehuda. Anybody who is lazy, he is not motivated to properly mourn a chacham who passes away, he himself is next in line to find himself in his own funeral. He himself is about to be buried while he could still have lived longer. Like it says about Yeshua, after he died, it says V'ikroise b'gvul nachlasei b'timnas serach asher b'har Ephraim mitzvayin lahar go'ash. Describing Yeshua's funeral, it says that it was Har Go'ash. It was north of Har Go'ash. Har Go'ash means to say that Sharoga Shalein Har, HaKadosh Baruch Hu was arousing the mountain to bury all the people there because they did not mourn Yeshua properly the way that they are supposed to. So Gemara says, you should also know that anybody who's lazy about the mourning of a Chacham will not have long days. Won't have long days. Why? Mida keneged Mida. He didn't care about the life of the Chacham. So in Shemayim, they don't care about his life. The pasuk that proves that is from Yeshaya Basasa Bishalcha Terivena Hagabruch Hakasha B'Yayim Kadim, that with measure he fought with him, meaning HaKadosh Baruch Hu measured his life that it should be shorter. Okay, now I'm going to ask Zakash, hold on a second. We just said that the people who didn't mourn Yeshua properly, but there's a pasuk in Sefer Shoftim that says, "Vayavdu ha'amas Hashem." People served Hashem. Kol yimei Yeshua. All Yeshua's days. Kol yimei Zakenim asher harichu yam achar Yeshua. And all the old men who lived for a long time after Yeshua. So you see that the people who were there lived long, but they didn't respect him. So how can you say that somebody who does not properly mourn a chacham will have his life shortened? These people lived long. So Gemara says that's not a problem. They had arichus yamim. They didn't have long years. They had long days. What does that mean? What's the difference between long years and long days? Long years means they lived a long time. They didn't have long days means that they weren't full. They were not good. Something where it says, hold on a second. When it says Laman Yerbu Yemechem Vimei V'nechem, so that means that they're only going to have long days. If they do good, Shema says they're going to have long days. That means that they're only going to have long days, not going to have long years, not going to live long, they're only going to have good days. The Gemara says, no. But a bracha is different. When we're blessing someone and we say long days, we mean both. We mean good days and we mean long years. So now the Gemara says, Amar Chia Bar Abba Rabbi Yechanan, if there's a group of brothers and one of them passes away, all the others should be afraid because something's going on. And if there's a group of people that are part of a chabura, they are together, they're a group, and somebody passes away, everybody else should also fear. And it's not clear if that applies if the oldest of the group dies because he's the biggest and he's the greatest, and yet he was susceptible to this curse, or if the bigger problem is we're the youngest, because curses often begin from the youngest. And that'll take us to the end of Daf. Hey.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.